We have breaking news out of the Kremlin. There's been lots of information out that we've been talking a lot about. The United States is considering allowing Ukraine to use long-range weapons to fire throughout the depth of the Russian Federation. We've seen Anthony Blinken. We're going to see that here shortly. But Biden has said that they're, quote, working out, trying to give permission and what that may mean, et cetera. And as even the United States and Ukraine are trying to figure out exactly what that would mean and what the limitations may be, Russia has been talking about that they view this in very, very stark terms. And now this is just coming out. This has just come out from the Kremlin. This is Vladimir Putin on Russian television. And he's going to say something in this clip that is very, very stark and alarming. And we better pay attention to this because this is new language that's also coming out of the Kremlin. Watch this.
Когда речь идет о использовании высокоточного оружия большой дальности западного производства, это совершенно другая история. Дело в том, что я уже об этом говорил, и любые эксперты это подтвердят, и у нас, и на Западе, наносить удары современными высокоточными системами большой дальности западного производства украинская армия не в состоянии. Она не может этого делать. Это возможно только с использованием разведданных со спутников, которыми Украина не располагает. Это данные только со спутников Евросоюза, либо на Соединенных Штатах, в общем, с натовских спутников. Это первое. Второе, и очень важное, может быть, ключевое, заключается в том, что полетные задания в эти ракетные системы могут, по сути, вносить только военнослужащие стран НАТО. Украинские военнослужащие делать это не могут. И поэтому речь идет не о том, чтобы разрешать украинскому режиму наносить удары по России этим оружием или не разрешать. Речь идет о том, чтобы принять решение о том, что страны НАТО напрямую участвуют в военном конфликте или нет. Если это решение будет принято, это будет означать не что иное, как прямое участие стран НАТО, Соединенных Штатов, европейских стран в войне на Украине. Это их прямое участие. И это уже, конечно, существенным образом меняет саму суть, саму природу конфликта. Это будет означать, что страны НАТО, США, европейские страны воюют с Россией. А если это так, то, имея в виду изменение самой сути этого конфликта, мы будем принимать соответствующие решения, исходя из тех угроз, которые нам будут создаваться.
That was alarming here. That last comment especially, where he said that because we regard the use of these long-range weapons as only being possible, whether it's from satellite or from the technological capacity of the operators, it could only come with NATO countries. That will be regarded by Russia as direct participation by NATO countries in Russia. And he says this will mean we are at war with NATO. I mean, that is so stark. He has never used that kind of direct language. And I can just almost imagine that people already in the West are going to be discounting this and saying that it's just more bluster. It's just more, more red lines from the Kremlin that are they're not real, that we can cross with no cost and anything else. And folks, I'm just telling you, we are literally playing with fire when we do this. And the Russians, in fact, we're going to see a clip here in a minute where Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, makes that exact claim. But I'm just telling you, as a rational human being, we dare not think that Russia does not mean this. And I'm going to show you why there's some tangible reasons why we need to do it, aside from just conceptual ones. But just imagine for yourself, just try to flip the script here and just imagine what our response would be if all of a sudden Russia is supplying weapons and capacity and technological capacity to any of our interests, say Iran in the Middle East, and they use weapons to strike directly at American targets and American military in the Middle East and kills American soldiers. Are we going to say, well, it was just the Iranians that fired that? Or are we going to say, well, we know that only Russia can give them that capacity because Iran doesn't have it, so our troops were killed by Russians and we're going to do nothing? I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, there's probably no chance that the West would ever do that. It just turn a blind eye and say, well, yeah, we'll hit Iran, but that's it. We're not going to do anything else. So don't expect Russia. And that example is actually not even that good, because that's a foreign location for our troops. But if it was in fact on American soil, that's even the bigger one here. So imagine that it was like, say, for example, a Mexican drug cartel or something got capabilities that only could come from Russia. And we know because they're talking about it openly, providing it to a cartel, and it strikes anywhere in America. The gloves are coming off. Don't imagine that Russia is anything different than us. Already their territory has been penetrated in the Kursk area, and they're in the process of resolving that now, as we're also going to see here. But this would be, and you heard him yourself, he just said it, this would be a fundamental change and a fundamental difference that changes the nature of the conflict, which he used the word war. Now, all this time, he's so far been using special military operations, because that's not just a euphemistic thing that, tries to make war sound softer. There's actually very practical ramifications in the Russian system that special military operations mean one thing and war means a different. So he's used that for a very technical reason inside Russia. War has different meanings and expands the scope of what they can do, and expands the scope of how they conduct the war. And we dare not think that, no, Russia would never do anything directly against the West, because Article 5. Because if Russia thinks it's being attacked, and now it's seen its territory imposed, and now then apparently the United States is considering giving permission to strike deep into Russian territory with much more capable weapon systems than the drones that the Ukraine side of its own has been using, then there's every reason to think that they are going to take direct countermeasures. Because otherwise, you can see from their perspective, they're like, then there will be no stop, because we've been seeing it from the beginning of this war, the continual escalation, the advancement, and the capabilities that we have provided to the Ukraine side. Started off with, javelins and other kinds of anti-tank missiles, shoulder launch stuff, and then it advanced into self-propelled artillery pieces. Then it went into the top rank tanks and other things from the West, armored personnel carriers, Bradleys, Strykers from the United States, Martyrs from the Germans. Then it was higher echelon air defense systems. And then it was the Patriot air defense system, the top that we had. And then, of course, it was the HIMARS system. Then it was the ATACMS systems. And now it's the F-16s. Literally everything keeps coming. And now then, from the Russian perspective, and you got to see this over time, now then you're potentially going to add in long-range precision strike weapons on the territory of Russia. And we've already seen that some of the drones themselves have been hitting Russian apartment complexes. They've been hitting oil infrastructure, other energy infrastructure. So it's already starting to drive in there. And this idea that we seem to have in the West, that if we take the war to Russia, it will make them realize that this is a losing proposition and cause them to maybe the elite turn against Putin. Folks, it's just rational. Already we see Putin has somewhere around 72% support rating after 2.5 years of war. If you keep hitting them in their country, there is no country on the planet, least of all us, that's going to say, if you hit us on our homeland, we're going to cower. Just, 9/11. Look at what's happened in Britain when they've suffered some terrorist activities. We never just turn a blind eye. We never back down. We always step it up. So don't imagine this fantasy that the Russians are going to do anything different. They're going to react probably the same way we would. And that's a bad thing, because we dare not take this next step if it's going to expand the war to harm our own interest. And folks, don't anybody have this fantasy that you can win a war against Russia. There won't be a winner. There will be a survivor. Somebody will end up last one standing, but everybody's going to lose. But don't think that because Russia would not win, that they won't take this action to defend their sovereignty, when we would do the exact same thing. We wouldn't worry about what's going to happen later. We would respond, because we're not just going to allow our territory to be hit. This is a really dangerous time. We are starting to get into some real troubling territory here. And I pray to God that the Biden administration shows the least amount of appetite suppressant here and doesn't take this next step in here. It's already on the edge because of things that have happened. And it's unclear exactly what Russia's going to do here in the near future. And again, I'm going to talk about that in more detail in this episode. But we don't want to take this trick that could make it fundamentally different. I mean, you saw that look on Putin's face. These are not just off-the-cuff comments. This is obviously something that he planned intentionally to say. It was to a Russian audience, so he's letting them know by using that term war that he is deadly serious on this. So he chooses his words very, very carefully. We'll see what comes in the next, but you'll about to see some other officials in Russia have been saying similar things. And listen, you just need to understand this is on the verge, on the cusp of a potential new level of this war that could genuinely have escalation risks and ramifications for global security, for our own security. Let's take this seriously. All right, that was stuff that literally minutes before I went on air, we became aware of this stuff here. So we preempted what we were about to start with to go with that. But as you're about to see, it tails in like a hand in glove to the things we're already planning to see. And what I want to start with or go to next is something that the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said in reference to some comments about Volodymyr Zelensky from Ukraine, saying he's going to have another peace summit, and this time maybe he'll allow Russians to come. That's kind of what he's saying here. And so they're offering these terms of peace, which are absolutely in the advantage of the Ukraine side, almost like they're willing to give a little bit of something to the Russian side. Here's how Lavrov responded to that offer.
The Zelensky's initiative is well known, and everyone already got tired of that, because it's an ultimatum. The fact that he's tried to stick to this ultimatum means only one thing. The West does not want to have a fair agreement. The West wants to go on with doing everything to bring Russia closer, as they hope, to the situation where they can declare that they have inflicted strategic defeat to us on the battlefield. They want to see their competition weaker. So as for the Zelensky formula, we have never taken it seriously. We were only amazed at the fact that someone bought into it after the Western pressure, of course.
Now, in that comment there, that was back on, I think, the 9th of September, he makes the comment that the Western side still wants the strategic defeat of Russia. He said that's their objective. Now, some may say, well, you're being paranoid. No, he's not being paranoid. He's just reading what our senior officials are saying directly out loud, explicitly. Here is Secretary of State Antony Blinken talking about that exact thing on the day after.
Ukraine continues to stand strong, and I believe that it's very much on a trajectory where it will be able to stand strongly on its own 2 feet, militarily, economically, democratically. It will be increasingly integrated with Europe. And Putin will continue to know a strategic failure in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians will know a strategic success in building a strong, vibrant country.
Okay, that's just fantasy, first of all. But you see, it's not fantasy or hyperbole on the Russian side to say that the West wants that. Secretary Blinken expressly said it verbatim out of his own mouth. We want the strategic defeat of Russia and the strategic victory of Ukraine. Well, now listen, it doesn't take a genius to look on the battlefield and what's happened in 2.5 years and recognize that without significant Western influence and impact and an additional aid above what's going on, that will never happen. So one has to wonder, what does Secretary Blinken mean when he says that we're going to help them win? Because just giving them equipment and ammunition and stuff has clearly not worked, and they're moving back on all fronts. So if you still are saying on September the 10th of 2024 that we're working toward the strategic defeat of Russia and the strategic victory of Ukraine, then that must imply that you have something in your mind that you're going to do to change the calculus. Maybe that was what was on Vladimir Putin's mind when he made those comments just hours ago. Again, that's why we're in a dangerous territory here. It's not just the United States, though. It's also the United Kingdom. Here is the new foreign secretary for UK, who's adding what he's doing new.
Ukraine is a first-order priority for me as Defence Secretary and for this new government. That's why on the second day in the job, I flew to Odessa and I joined President Zelensky and his team for the afternoon. I told him, the Ukrainians' courage inspires the world. I also told him that at this critical moment, this new government would step up our support for Ukraine. So in our first week, we announced a new package of UK military support, including ammunition, missiles, artillery guns, a new commitment to speed up the deliveries pledged by the previous government, and a promise to spend £3 billion a year on military support for Ukraine, this year, next year, and in every year for as long as it takes.
Okay. So again, listen to this from Russian ears and the concerns and the fears that they already have. He said that the UK is now going to step up its support. Again, 2.5 years already in the books. Now then the new UK government is saying they're going to step up their capacity, and they are going to give £3 billion a year and every year for as long as it takes. So if you're the leader of Russia and you hear the Secretary of State for the United States and the Minister or the Secretary of Foreign Affairs or MOD, I'm sorry, for UK, and they're both saying it's victory for Ukraine and defeat for Russia, what are you going to think? Okay, that continues on. Now let's look and say, okay, there's Zelensky right there. yeah, and you see those there's a glad hand in there, and of course this is playing all over the place as well. But perhaps because of what Zelensky's being told behind those closed doors, he seems to be in a pretty cocky position for somebody who's going backwards on the battlefield, and it makes one wonder, what is he being told behind the scenes? Because here's what he's saying in front of the cameras.
Intelligence reports of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine and the Foreign Intelligence Service. Details about the opportunities existing for Ukraine, as well as the threats. We see what steps are planned in Moscow, and we will act accordingly, exactly as tough as necessary for the sake of Ukraine. And I want to say now to anyone in the world who still wants to help Putin in any way, we will do everything not only to defend our state and people, but to really consolidate the world for the sake of strong responses to warmongering or any attempt to prolong the war.
Well, now I wonder, who do you suppose he might have in mind there when he's giving these warnings to anyone around the world who may be wanting to help Putin? Well, I think it's pretty clear that there's two big primary targets, and one of them is Iran. They've been in the news recently because the United States has said that they are giving long-range missiles actually to Russia as well. If you can throw that one up there from the Washington Post, that's the one we're talking about here. This is coming from Iran. So we already know Iran has been sending drones almost from the beginning and helping Russia in that capacity. But now apparently intelligence is saying that they're also sending ballistic missiles, which Secretary of State said that is coming even sooner within the next months, on top of all the things that have been going on. Now then, of course, we also have the North Korean side. They are continuing to step up their support. They've been sending hundreds, I think not hundreds, in the thousands, 16,000, I think 500 to be specific in the recent counting of those big truckloads that you see, these big shipping containers that you see sometimes going down the road on 18-wheelers, 16,500 of those of who knows what all kinds of missiles or artillery shells or other kinds of weapons. It's unclear, but there is massive amounts of stuff going into the Russian side. So all these arsenals are going in. So now one would think, if you're the leader of the country that is really starting to see that the tactical fronts are crumbling all around now, even in the north, even in the Kursk area, the Russian troops are now starting to press in and now daily take back portions of that land that they had lost starting in August. And of course, the issue on the Eastern Front continues to crumble, and the Russians are making advances there every day. If you're that person and you see that there's all this weaponry coming in from Iran, from North Korea, apparently other reports recently say that a lot of support has been coming from the Chinese side, more than has been made aware publicly, you would think maybe I need to be finding a negotiated settlement. But instead, he sounds really cocky and confident and giving warnings to other nations here. A person in his weakened position would ordinarily not be expected to be given those kinds of comments. One wonders, again, Does he know something behind the scenes? Is the West actually thinking of escalating? Well, according to Anthony Blinken, again, this is what he said a couple of days ago, that, yeah, we are actually considering allowing long-range weapons to be fired into Russia.
From day one, as you've heard me say, we have adjusted and adapted as needs have changed, as the battlefield has changed, and I have no doubt that we'll continue to do that as this evolves.
And so I need to fix something here manually for a sec. What you see there is him talking the same thing, that headline that Gary showed at the beginning, that President Biden is actively thinking about allowing these long-range weapons to be used, and they're trying to, quote, work it out. And listen, we need to be thinking a lot more strongly about what we're doing here. We've got to slow this train down and think about the potential ramifications. But that doesn't seem to be happening in the United States, because here is Senator Coons, I believe yesterday, was interviewed on CNN. And you see, he's got an open door policy as well. And just kind of whatever you're asking for, yeah, sure, we'll give it. Here's what he said.
I know there's an active discussion ongoing about how far into Russia and with what munitions to allow the Ukrainians to strike. I respect our president's concerns about escalation. I understand that he's got much more detailed intelligence about what's going on in the Kremlin, in Putin's thinking, and in the Russian military than I do. But over the course of the last 2 years, I think time and again, we've been shown that when we take the initiative and when we provide Ukraine with more sophisticated weapons and with more robust support, they put it to good use. And this is a difficult fight. And I want to make sure that we put the Ukrainians in the strongest possible position for them to push back on Russia's brutal aggression in Ukraine.
Okay, so he said a couple things there that are really important. He said, now, I assume that the White House understands what's going on in the Kremlin, that they understand what the capabilities are, and that this somehow makes sense to do these long range. He goes, I understand there's some concern about escalation and some things about the Russians could do, but I'm sure that the White House has that under control. I'm not so sure that that's a good, safe bet. I don't know if the president behind the scenes is tracking with what's going on in the Kremlin, or if we just think, I know what they're saying publicly. Because listen, I'm going to show you some things here that Lavrov has said, in recent days. And even though the clip that we showed at the beginning of Putin was from hours ago, so today, so it was before that Coons had made his comments there. Surely we're not so ignorant that we don't know that Russia is viewing all of these things in context, and that they're growing in their capacity across the board in all the categories of war, all the things that are necessary to wage war against even NATO. And I'm going to show you some things in a minute you probably don't know about. It's kind of an obscure report by Chatham House. I'll get to that in a minute. But that should really alarm everybody, what I'm about to show you, in combination with what you've already seen here. Because now, while Coons is talking about that, he keeps saying we're going on to win. But what does win even mean? I mean, one of the things that we never hear, and you didn't hear it from Blinken just a second ago, we want a strategic victory for Ukraine. What does that mean? And I mean like an actual definition. Because if you don't even know what you're trying to accomplish, then how will you even know if it has any chance of success? How will you know a comparison and analysis of ends and means? I want to achieve this ends, and so it's going to cost this kind of means to get there. How will you even know if that makes any sense? I have never heard anybody articulate what win means in the last year or so. Earlier on, especially in the 2023 offensive, I heard some people say, well, it's driving Russia back to the 1991 borders. And now we've said, well, we kind of given up on that, but no one has come out with a new definition of what it means. When Secretary of State Blinken is using it on the television right there just days ago, then he owes it to us to say, here's what victory looks like. Here's what we envision and what it would take, the means to get to the ends of a victory. But he didn't come up with any. Coons didn't even offer even a possibility. He just says, yeah, we'll just keep giving it. You heard the foreign secretary for Britain just say, for as long as it takes. As long as it takes to what? I mean, these are critical questions, critical issues that have to be answered, and no one is answering them. which gives the impression that we don't know, that we're just doing stuff, that we're just like saying, I don't know, let's try some long-range missiles, see how that worked out. We sent some tanks over and some air defense missiles and a few jets. I don't know, let's try this one, see what's going on. Folks, that's how you stumble into a world war. That's how you stumble into an engagement with a nuclear-armed adversary. We have never gotten to a situation in global history where you have two nuclear powers actually fighting each other. We are obviously a razor's edge away from it right now, but there's still at least a degree of separation through the proxy war of us using Ukraine. But that razor thin line is starting to fray. And you just heard the president of Russia say that if you go across this line, then it's going to mean war. That's nearly as directly as you can possibly make what he just said publicly right there. And here, let me show you here what a couple of days ago his foreign minister said, and this is before Putin made his comments here, but these are just as alarming. Watch this.
Запад не хочет избежать эскалации. Запад, по-русски говоря, нарывается. Очень важно понимать, что у нас есть своя доктрина, в том числе доктрина использования ядерного оружия, которая, кстати, сейчас уточняется, и о которой американским деятелям очень хорошо известно. И мы сейчас еще раз подтверждаем, что игра с огнем, а они, как дети малые, со спичками балуются, это очень опасная штука для взрослых дяденек и тетенек, которым доверено ядерное оружие в той или иной западной стране.
Okay, well, if you couldn't read that, I'm sorry. I know the words are really small on the bottom of the screen there, but basically what he's saying is he doesn't understand why the West is playing with fire, because he said, listen, we have a nuclear arsenal. And he's talking in the context of discussing this possibility of U.S. and other Western allies using long-range weapons to strike at Russia anywhere. And he said, we have our nuclear doctrine and it's being adjusted. Why would it be adjusted? For the reasons we just keep laying out, for the reasons that make a lot of sense. But he's giving this as much warning as you can. And then again, when you now, on top of that, when that was on the 10th of September, when you talk about now on the 12th, what Putin himself is saying, he's being as explicit as you can. I mean, in diplomatic terms, the only thing is left is to say, I will expressly regard it as an act of war and we will respond. That's nearly what he did say, at least according to the interpretation of the interpretation there, that he did say, because it would be an act of war for the West, and we will take appropriate countermeasures. Now, I know that there's so many in the West that love to keep saying, yeah, that's not going to happen. He's not going to do that because he knows, and I've heard people say this a lot, he, being Putin, knows that if he ever used nuclear weapons, that his country is going to be wiped out. But does he know that? And is that thought right? Because let me just ask you here. Let's go through a few rhetorical questions here. Which American cities are you willing to exchange for Kiev, for Kharkiv, or for any other city in Ukraine? What if you're in Europe? You want to sacrifice Berlin? You want to sacrifice Paris? I mean, which one of these cities are you willing to sacrifice for? I can't think of one that I would sacrifice any Western city of any size, any Western troop of any number for anything going on the Ukraine side here. Now, I've said this many times. Militarily speaking, Russia has been building up its force in a capacity so that it can win the war in Ukraine, and it can achieve its military goals in a conventional way, and in time, whether sooner or later, it virtually certainly will, as long as things continue to go on the current trajectory and the path that they're on. Ukraine doesn't have the manpower, irrespective of anything that Britain is going to give them material-wise, or however much cash the United States wants to hand over. It's not going to make any difference, because you don't win with money or material, you win with men. Ukraine doesn't have them. They've got to be trained men. That should be self-evident. So Russia does have the trained men. They do have the system, a pipeline of training. They continue to do that. They've got all the material that they can produce themselves. And now, as I just showed you, from Iran and from North Korea as well. They have a pipeline going on. And according to recent reports, so does China. China's been given lots of support, more than what was previously known. All that together should show you it is irrational at the highest order to ignore all of those factors and say we're going to keep going on, and then we're going to expand what we do against Russia in a way that could cause them to finally respond beyond the borders. Do not think that Russia doesn't mean what they say. It's irrational to do so. I had planned on giving you an update of the tactical situation. I think I'm going to hold that one back for another day because I think it's not as important right now. Just know that there is continuing to be more advances in the Kursk area by the Russians. They're driving Ukraine further out. They're taking more of these villages back. The same is true in the Kupiansk area, in the Pokrovsk area, in the Vuhledar area, and the Toretsk as well. Sorry. So all of those are continuing to see degradation from the Ukraine side and an advancement of the Russian side. So that's the tactical situation, which continues to go on the ground. But I want to show you something that there is at least one possibility of somebody in the West besides Viktor Orban and Fico from Slovakia to say that they want this war to come to an end. And that is Scholz from Chancellor Scholz from Germany, who is now kind of changing his tune. And he's been saying, we're going to keep giving Ukraine stuff. But now all of a sudden he's saying, you know what? Maybe we need a quick talk for push for peace right now. But here's the problem. This is coming too late. I think the last chance we would have had for peace was going to be in June of this year, before the Ukraine side plunged into the Kursk area, because there has been a fundamental change on the Russian side. And here's the Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov is reinforcing that. And this is what he's saying. I think this was actually it was yesterday. That's right. He said the Kremlin clearly voiced the conditions under which Russia is ready to sit down at the negotiating table. They include the complete withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the territory of the new Russian regions. That's the 4 oblasts that they annexed in 2022. The complete demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine and its non-aligned status, and the lifting of all sanctions against Russia. And Russia will not discuss any so-called peace formulas of Zelensky under any circumstances. So he's saying we're not going to talk anymore. We're not going to negotiate. And let me just give you a little definition there. When he says the demilitarization and the denazification of Ukraine, now then they mean on the ground. Either we'll get that through negotiations like that, we'll get everything that we asked for, and Ukraine will get off of all the territory that we tell it to, and they will not join NATO, all that stuff. Then I guess we would be willing to talk. But then that, folks, that's in terms of surrender. And as I just showed you from Zelensky, he's in no mood to do that. So what does that leave then? That leaves continued fighting. And as I also said, Russia has the ability to do that. Now, this is where things start to get a little bit uncomfortable, especially for Western audiences. I'm going to show you this Chatham House article that came out this past July. So it was done after a little over 2 years of the war. And they came up with some very, very interesting conclusions. And they were specifically looking at the Russian capacity to increase its industrial capacity and its ability to win on the battlefield. But they said some additional things, which is Russian forces can count on improved reconnaissance, fire, and strike in complexes equipped with vast, I can't even read it under my own screen there, larger quantities of improved uncrewed area vehicles, UAVs, etc. Russian long-range strike and standoff munitions, coupled with multi-layered air defenses, represent the biggest conventional threat to NATO. So if this war spreads even on the conventional level, Russia's improvements in their capacity is a big conventional threat to the NATO. The aerospace forces, which is their Air Force and their Navy, remain critical parts of the nuclear conventional strategic deterrence force, potentially holding NATO assets at risk, destruction of facilities. Finally, asymmetric capabilities such as the use of cyber and information warfare and electronic warfare, counter UAV, counter precision guided munitions, and space-based assets are still able to offset NATO and U.S. conventional superiority. Do not miss that. Russia has advanced because of this war, because they were unprepared at the beginning. They spent a full year and a half retooling all their things and then making battlefield advancements, as is common in warfare, under fire, where they have to rapidly motivate and generate and come up with iterations of new ways to advance their capabilities in all the different areas. We entered this war saying we wanted to weaken Russia. We have achieved the exact opposite. They are now much stronger than they were in 2022. And listen, folks, we're flat-footed in NATO. We're not on a war footing. We're where Russia was in February 2022. And then they started cranking up all of their war-making material. And even though we've increased some things capacity-wise, both in the United States and in Europe, in terms of 155 millimeter artillery shells, et cetera, those incremental only. Nobody's at a wartime footing. And it would take years more, or at least a year and a half of equally so, of full-on support to go into that. And Russia's ready now. They have this big force. They're somewhere around 1.5 million active forces. They were about 1 million when it started. Now they're at 1.5, and they have all of the experience and the combat experience in modern warfare that none of us have. We've watched it from a distance. I could tell you a lot of the things that Russia's doing, but even if you put me in uniform today and put me in charge of a brigade or something, I mean, it would take months to get a unit trained up to have a good chance to fight a war against the Russian forces who are good at it right now, because we've got to completely retrain our mentality. We've got to change the way we're equipped, the way we fight, the way we're led. All these things have to change in the modern era, and we haven't. So we would be foolish to go into any kind of a fight with Russia. Let me tell you what we ought to do. We ought to recognize that we are in a grave and perilous situation here. If we fight on a conventional level with Russia, and again, they've got hundreds of thousands of more troops than they had at the beginning. And these guys are much more trained now than especially they were at the beginning, and much more trained and capable than the Western armies. No matter how much people want to tell you to the contrary, I'm telling you for a fact that we're not as advanced as the Russians are in terms of fighting modern warfare. We should recognize that and say, okay, you know what? Let's end this deal now. Let's follow Viktor Orban. And now even Schultz is belatedly coming into it. Let's shut this deal down. Let's get a negotiated settlement under the best terms that we can get, even if they're the ones that Ryabkov just mentioned there. They'd be terrible for Ukraine, but at least it would end the war. It would end the killing and the destruction, and it stop all of this potential for escalation. Now, if you want to say, all right, now then let's take this time, the next thing that would be smart is if we said, all right, let's shore up our eastern flank of NATO and increase our defenses there. And now then let's start retraining and reorganizing our armed forces to bring us back into a capable where we could actually provide a serious deterrent to any Russian aggression. That if we actually did engage on a conventional level, we would be able to do it. We would be able to succeed, because we're not there right now. That's what we should do. So this is now escalating beyond me saying that the Ukraine side needs to have a negotiated settlement. This is now for us. This is now for the United States, for Western Europe, for the NATO alliance. Folks, we are not ready to fight a war. You remember, it's been a couple of months now, maybe 2 or 3 months even, where on one of our shows here, I showed you what was admitted by NATO. It said that we had 5% of the air defense forces that we would need if we had to fight a conventional war against Russia. 5. Hopefully it's a little higher than that now. But even if it's doubled and it's 10%, that means that Russia, who has been stockpiling all kinds of categories of ammunition, to include air-to-air missiles, air-to-ground missiles, and air interceptor missiles. They are cranking all this stuff out because they've been on a full-on war footing for a long time. And now they're getting more from Iran and from North Korea that will allow them to sustain a big war. You saw from Chatham House, this is not some Russian situation here. This is not some kind of propaganda. This is our own analyst and in a UK place telling you we are not capable right now of defending in a conventional war against Russia. So we need to stop this nonsense and this madness today. That's, a conventional defeat would be catastrophic and it would just be horrific destruction, but that's nothing compared to what would happen if it goes nuclear. And you see that Russia is serious about this. They keep giving you all these warnings at the highest levels, and now again today with Vladimir Putin himself. We are playing with fire. I don't care who said it. It's true. All the information is there from our side, from the Russian side, from evidence on the ground. Everything the Ukraine side has been doing has been failing, and it's going to continue to fail. Do not double down on failure. We did it for 20 years in Afghanistan. We keep doing it in Iraq and in Syria with our troops there. They're pointless deployments. We're seeing the limits of power in the Middle East, that even Israel, with all of itself and all of these hundreds of aircraft filled with ammunition and weapons that we've been sending to Israel, they can't even defeat the Hamas people. They literally have exhausted all of their plans. They don't know what else to do, but they haven't won. And they still have a possibility of expanding that war between Hezbollah and Iran and several others in the region, some of the smaller militia. There are limits to power. I don't care how popular we are, how everyone claims we're the greatest military power in the history of the world. Folks, right now we're not. Right now we can be defeated or seriously harmed. And don't try to prove it, because even if somehow over time we could win, but it would take, like I said, probably 3 to 4 years to absorb the initial losses and then rebuild and then go back. You can't even imagine the catastrophic level of losses it would take to get to a win in the World War II sense. You would probably have even more people killed than you did then. And that's if it stayed conventional. Listen to me. Hear me. I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you things that can be validated and verified across the board on all sides here, and especially common sense. These things make sense. We need to stop this madness right here, right now, before things get even worse. That's your deep dive for this morning. We're going to have another one for you this afternoon with Mike Domino, former CIA officer, current fellow at Defense Priorities, where I work also. He's going to update us on some of the terror war and some things that are going on there. You're not going to want to miss that. That's at 4 o'clock this afternoon Eastern time. But listen, folks, this one right here is just something that's so important. I really do want you to share this. And as you see on the screen there, we're also now doing our podcasting there. So we have advancing the opportunities that people can have to hear us. If you don't have time to watch on a video, you can certainly listen to a podcast, Apple, iTunes, iHeartRadio, anywhere you get podcasts. You'll be able to get Daniel Davis Deep Dive. You got to search for it, that full name there, and you can get it. But folks, we appreciate you coming out with us, and we do ask you to please share this video with anyone you can while we still have time to influence decision makers. Thanks very much, and I'll see you this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.